It was all the housekeeper. She set everything up so she could take over the house.
Welcome to Modern Horror Stories podcast with Jamie, Alex, and Dave. And this is the first of our Christmas specials. And today we're going to be reviewing Don't Open Till Christmas, film made in 1984, directed by Edmund Purdom. Let's show our scores for this movie.
Ooh.
So one of the lower scored movies. Who wants to give this a synopsis?
Yeah, so Don't Open to Christmas is about a serial killer who's on a rampage, killing specifically people dressed as Santa Claus. And it's all set in London, and it opens with somebody dressed as Santa Claus being killed. Funnily enough, not while he was dressed as Santa Claus, but he was a moment earlier. And but the rest of the male deaths are people dressed as Santa Claus. There are two female deaths, but it's mostly men dying. I hope that's not a spoiler. But there will be spoilers in our review, so if you haven't seen the film, do go away and watch it. But yeah, that's the story. Oh, and somebody's investigating and trying to stop the murders from happening. I'm not sure if that's a good synopsis.
I thought it was excellent. I mean, I recognised it as the film that we were talking about. So on that basis, yeah.
Definitely the film we're talking about.
Yeah. So I did struggle a bit with this film, I've got to admit. I don't want to name any names, but there was some acting that I thought was could have maybe been directed a little better, or just could have been a bit more of an emotional through line with all of these characters, because a lot of them I just didn't understand what was going through their heads at any given time. Particularly with Kate and Cliff. I was never entirely sure what was going on there in that relationship, these two characters. Her dad is, spoiler alert, her dad is killed right at the start. And then the next day, her boyfriend, Cliff, decides to take her along to this nude photo shoot. And she doesn't sort of react to being taken along to this at all until this Santa Claus costume is taken out. And obviously she reacts because her father was killed in a Santa Claus costume. But there were just people react in the strangest ways in this film. And it did make it hard to watch. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Dave.
Yeah, I agree. It's all over the place, and I think that's because I did a bit of research, and the film was kind of completed, I think, in 1982 by Edmund Purdom, and when it was watched, I think they decided they couldn't release it, and so a guy called Alan Birkinshaw came back. He's credited as Al McGowan in the credits, and he was given the opportunity to rewrite and redirect a lot of the scenes. I think it's pretty much 50% his film, or it's pretty much two films put together. And I feel like as soon as I've seen the film twice, and the second time I knew that had happened, and it made a lot more sense of why it is so random. And whilst I would say there could be major improvements in the writing, directing, and acting, I actually quite liked lots of this movie.
Okay.
I liked all the scenes in the London dungeon. I loved the mask. I feel like the mask was very serviceable for a slasher movie. I loved seeing London in the 80s. And there were lots of bits of scenes that I liked. I felt like if you were going to mine this for a remake, as perhaps someone will one day do, then there'd be plenty to draw from.
There's a massive amount of potential. There are films that I think aren't great, and a lot of them don't have potential, whereas I think this one is one where, I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but there's a lot in there. There's a lot that you could kind of pull apart and put back together again.
It's interesting to hear that it's two films or two directors' visions pushed together, because you can really feel there's a choppiness to the film throughout. We get random snippets of things. Like there's a character that the housekeeper is incredibly interested in seeing the murder photos, but we never hear any more about that. And the Kate Briosky goes on a huge quest to solve the murder. She solves the whole thing, but we don't see that happen.
No.
She just appears towards the end and says, "I've solved it," but she only tells the killer. She doesn't tell anyone else, and the killer quite understandably kills her. So yeah, it really jumps around, and the most jumpy around part of it I felt was the relationship between the detective and Kate. Like her father's just been murdered and she's got a partner, but at some point she says to the detective who's investigating the murder, and that's the entirety of their relationship really, and she says, "You're the person I'm closest to," which it seems to come out of nowhere. And they have a romantic dinner together, and he even talks about romance during the dinner. And when when the detective first gets called to the murder scene to interview the Kate, sorry, he's told that we're meeting a woman and a man, and the detective says she is pretty. That's his first question. Like he's going to investigate someone. He's going to interview someone who's just lost their father, and he's like, "Is she hot though?" And
That's
then
what that's what the 1980s were like.
I guess
I've seen Ashes to Ashes, and my understanding is that the police in the 1980s were exactly like that.
okay, so this is a documentary.
You definitely got the sense of the time that it was made in, which occasionally was good. It was moments like that it wasn't so good. I mean, there were bits where, particularly with the kind of seedier elements of the film, a lot of the sort of the sets that they were using on the streets really, really worked. The seediness was good for most of it, except for some parts where it was seedy and it wasn't sort of intending to be. I suppose that's just an issue with it being a bit dated. But you can't blame somebody for making a film in the 1980s, can you?
No, I don't know if I implied that there were two directors for this film. In fact, there were four directors for this film. Yeah, one guy
In a
was
minute, you'll double it again to 8.
Yeah.
one director was sacked after 2 days, and then I know that the flashback scene that occurs right at the end, that was directed by a fourth director.
Wow.
The
So
scene
what?
where we find out what happened to Giles as a child, that was directed by.
Okay. Do we know why exactly the director was fired after 2 days? I've not heard of many people being sacked after 2 days.
I would love to find out. It just says here, Purdom quit the production and writer Derek Ford was hired to take over directing, but he would be dismissed after 2 days.
Oh, so sorry, was it Purdom who was dismissed?
No, Purdom did the vast majority of the film,
Oh, fine.
and then someone took over, but was sacked after 2 days.
Bloody hell.
Wow.
Um,
I'm very curious about the budget of this film because they used a lot of locations and a lot of expensive looking locations. Like they had a huge sequence in the London Dungeon, another big sequence in the Piccadilly Theatre, and they had this incredible office overlooking Trafalgar Square, or at least I think it's Trafalgar Square. And yeah, so many locations. The apartment as well, indoors, outdoors, they were all over the place. And I was wondering if they just had millions to spend on all these locations, or if they just knew the owners of all these buildings and
I was
pulled them.
wondering because Purdom's a Shakespearean actor, so
Okay.
I was wondering if they had a show on at the time in or they already had all the staff there or something like that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, no, I did really like those. I mean, maybe that's just me as sort of a theatre person. I liked seeing those moments. I liked seeing the London Dungeon. I liked seeing the theatre. That's all. That's going to keep me entertained. I think whatever happens. But yeah, I'd be curious to know how that came about.
yeah, they used the locations really well. I like the London Dungeon scene. I like the scene underneath the was it the Palace Theatre?
Piccadilly.
Piccadilly, yeah.
Piccadilly Theatre, yes. The one of the Santas gets killed in um the corridors under the theatre. I liked. There's also a scene right at the end of the film which I thought was shot pretty well, with the conclusion of and the death of the kid. Well, maybe it was the death of the killer. It's not completely sure what happens at the end.
They
But
left
yeah,
out.
there's They use the locations quite well. There are moments which feel quite well directed, and others which just feel really clumsy. It's a very strange mix.
Yeah, so no, watch this film if you want to sort of get some kind of tonal whiplash. Um, but no,
Yes,
it is
yeah.
worth watching, to be completely fair. Like, even just as somebody sort of who's interested in film, it's, you know, if you want to see a sort of cult horror film from the 80s, I think this is a good one to go for.
It's a nice time capsule of, I think, of London in the 1980s as well.
Yes.
And the sleaziness of men in the
Yes.
80s.
Yes.
More
But
universal, that one, than just 1980s. But
I guess.
they were very good at it in the 1980s, to be fair to them. They really perfected their craft.
But maybe a lot of them got their comeuppance in this film.
Yes,
Well,
they do actually. That's true.
not the sleazy men, just random other men who
Yes, no,
who
exactly.
turned up really
Yeah,
nice. But yeah, maybe they were sleazy themselves.
more of a nuclear deterrent than anything else. I think just killing
Yeah,
off random men and hoping the sleazy ones change their ways.
yeah.
Pretty nearly everyone dies in this film, don't they? There's only the housekeeper and Cliff survive.
Wow.
Maybe it was all the housekeeper. She set everything up so she could take over the house.
I can believe that.
Or to look at those crime scene photos. That's all she wanted.
She was so into that. I love the extreme close up while she's
Yes,
drinking
yeah.
of seeing these crime scene photos.
I would love to see this film with a kind of like a stamp along the bottom with which director directed which bits.
Yeah.
And see how that feels, because like I say, some of it works quite well, other of it is really clunky and badly acted, and yeah, I'd love to see a breakdown. Because have you seen Omen 2?
No.
And that had two directors whose names escape me right now, but the guy who handled the first part of the film before he was sacked might be Mike Hodges. Correct me in the comments if it's not Mike Hodges. Did a fantastic job. And you can see very distinctly where the other director took over. But because this film was cut together from all the director's bits of work, it's not very clear. But just from a filmmaking point of view, it would be nice to see who did which bits.
And that way we could blame people individually as opposed to just sort of sharing it out like we are today.
Yes, we can apportion blame in a more fair way, I think. Yeah. So if you enjoyed this film, or if you've got a comment on this film, put it in the comment section below. And join us tomorrow, where we're going to be talking about how we can improve this movie. So I hope to see you then.
See you then.